Welcome to John Redmann, Power of Attorney, the show that aims to empower you through knowledge of the law. I'm Attorney John Redmann. Today we're talking about the controversial issue of gun control. We'll look at what's happening nationally and in our state and how all of this could affect your rights.
And hello everyone, I'm Shauna Sanford. Our guests today are two members of the state legislature who will be debating gun control during the legislative session coming up in April. Joining us today are State Representative Austin Badon, a Democrat who represents the New Orleans area, and State Representative Kevin Pearson, a Republican who represents the Slidell area.
Our guests will be on in just a moment, but we also want to make sure you get in on the conversation while you're watching the show. Send in your questions via email, Facebook, and Twitter. All the information is on your screen. We want to hear from you, and we'll answer as many of your questions as we can during the show.
Our guests are going to be coming up in just a few moments, but first, John, what are the legal issues that you're most concerned about? I mean, we live here in Louisiana, one of the most pro-gun states in the country. What are your major concerns when it comes to this whole debate about gun control?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. We're not only pro-gun. Just a few months ago, we passed an amendment that reinforced how strong our constitutional rights are to gun. It's a Louisiana constitutional right to protect your right to bear arms. The guests on the show are going to help us address it, but now they want to get into whether or not your mental health status is a factor. It's a landmine-laden path, and it's going to be one of the things that it's going to be very difficult. I see it as a less than 50-50 chance of going anywhere, but I do think gun reform, there's room for it because we need to have our communities a lot safer.
Well, our guests today are going to be debating that very issue during the legislature, but we're going to get a jump on that discussion here on the show. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back with Representatives Austin Badon and Kevin Pearson. We'll be right back. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. If you are just joining us today, our guests are State Representative Kevin Pearson and Austin Badon. And as the country and our state legislators debate the issue of gun control, our guests will be involved in the laws that may come out at the state level. We're also going to be taking your questions in just a few moments. Gentlemen, let's continue with our discussion, and thank you both for being here. We appreciate your time and insight into this. Let's just talk a little bit about where this discussion is going at the national level and how it's going to influence what you all are going to do at the state level. Representative Badon, let's start with you.
Well, right now it's probably at the pinnacle of all of the dialogue that's going on at the national level. I mean, you have factions that are fighting against more gun restrictions, and then you have another faction that is promoting more gun restrictions, and you have the powerful NRA, which has come out, and I want to say I think it was really an abomination the way they used the president's daughters in their latest attack campaign against this. That was something that should not have been done, and I think that they should retract it. But it's something that's long overdue. It's a common sense approach that we have to address the senseless killings that's going on within this country. What happened in Connecticut really was the icing on the cake to this whole gun debate, and I think that we can really get a lot of good things out of this tragedy by enacting some gun restrictions.
Representative Pearson.
You know, I look at what has happened and the tragedies, and we have to also look and say, how could we have stopped that? And any of the proposals, would they have stopped it? And I think in most cases, we say the Connecticut shooting. I mean, as we were talking about, the lady had the weapons there. She knew her son was unstable. She had the weapons legally. And before we go and pass all of these things, let's just really identify, will they work? Have they worked historically? And the concern certainly is to breach, take away any of the protection in the Second Amendment for the right to protect and bear arms. I mean, I think that's very vital to many people, but looking somehow to see how criminals are obtaining the guns. I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier. I think it all gets back to the education of youngsters and children at early ages, which I think in the country somewhat we've neglected for years, and we've had a strong bent on that more recently.
Right.
Let me, on that note right there, we'll never get people to come to agreement on exactly what to do about guns. And whatever reform happens, if any, is going to be with a lot of people very upset and a lot of people very happy, if any reform happens. But can we agree that guns are being glorified like we've never seen before in movies, on video games? Kids are playing video games where they're shooting and killing virtual bad guys and army guys, or, well, jihad guys, or whatever they're shooting at, hours and hours on end, and you get points and rewards for being the guy shooting with the biggest, baddest guns. What do you think about that?
Parents really need to take control, parents and guardians. I mean, we buy kids water pistols, and then we go and they graduate to BB guns, and then you buy a .22 for small game, and then, unfortunately, it graduates to a high-powered rifle that could tear through a bulletproof vest. And now it's at the point where you have assault weapons that are proliferating our communities. And if you look at the very wording, assault weapons, it does not dictate well for these type of instruments. It's something that there's no need for in our community. These are weapons of war. If you look on the streets of most urban communities, the AK-47, for example, that was built after World War II. It's something that there's no need for. It's a weapon of war. And the movie industry, the television industry, really need to take a hard look at the product they're putting out. We were talking earlier about every time you look at a movie promo, there's a person standing there with a gun in their hand. Or there's so much violence and a loss of humanity in movies and in television that the industry needs to really take a look at their product, because what they're putting out, our children, our people who are at risk, they're looking at this and they're glorifying the whole aspect of guns.
The Homeland Security Committee met just recently to deal with the issue of guns and school safety. And there's this question out there, do more guns equal, if you have more guns, will you be in a safer environment? There are some who feel that there should be armed guards in elementary schools. I think there's one legislator from the northern part of the state who's going to propose that. Where do you all stand on that issue?
I think that the discussion should come up, and I think we should not necessarily just armed guards, but standards for protecting schools. I mean, they should all have a process and a procedure. I mean, that should be on the forefront. As far as the armed guards on all the schools, I mean, certainly I'm willing to listen to it. There is a cost there, but I mean, the life of the children is foremost. Would it, would it deter the violence? Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. There's also been discussion from others about allowing certain members to carry guns within the schools. And, there is one thing that you have to look at. If I did want to cause carnage, am I going to go to a place that has a big sign that says gun-free zone if I'm not going to pay any attention to it? I mean, I'm a criminal. I don't pay attention to the law. Now, if I'm driving my child there, I actually left my gun at home if it's in my vehicle, because I can't even drive on the property with it. But the criminal's not going to pay any attention to that. So that's something else that should come into context as well.
Well, that is an interesting part of the discussion that is being raised about making areas that are currently gun-free zones no longer gun-free zones. Is that a valid discussion?
Well, it is a valid discussion. I don't know if the whole gun-free zone thing has worked. I mean, as Representative Pearson mentioned before, if you're a bad guy, you're not really going to look at that kind of stuff, those signs and things like that. You're going to do what it is you do, and that's be a bad person who is going to take a weapon and try to harm or take property from somebody else, a law-abiding person. And
as one person pointed out, that sign indicates that whoever's there on that gun-free zone is a quote-unquote soft target.
Correct. That's very true. That's very true. I mean, this whole dialogue and discussion has to go back to the point of saving people's lives, what's best for our communities, and I think that's a discussion that we need to have at the dinner table with our youngsters, because they live it on a daily basis. We see it on the news. I mean, in Chicago alone, they had over 500 murders in that city. In New Orleans, we had 200 plus murders. Since the tragedy in Newtown, we have had over 900 people who have been killed on the streets of the United States. We have to do something about it. More people are dying in the United States than are dying abroad.
And the flip side of that is that gun sales have actually gone up in light of the shooting. What does that tell you?
I think that is one of those quick reactions to, as the federal government comes along and says, look, we're looking at banning this, I think all the time, every time your sales are going to spike and something like that. So
people are worried that if they don't buy their guns now,
if they don't
might
buy
not
them
be
now,
able to
they're
buy
not
them
going to get
later.
them. And it's like, I'm going to go ahead and get it now. So, I mean,
enrollment in the NRA is up, I think, 100,000 people because they want to support the NRA, which is fighting to keep Second Amendment rights to own and bear arms intact.
You know, the problem with the NRA is they believe that the government is going to come and say, everybody turn in your guns. And I don't really believe that's what government is intending to do. And the NRA is using a scare tactic to try to build up its own body and membership. And that's not the case. We as legislators throughout the states and as well as the federal government, in my opinion, we have to work in a bipartisan manner. Put aside Republican and Democratic differences and work together, because when those assassins go out and those bullets start flying, they don't look for Republicans, they don't look for Democrats, they're just trying to hit people. We need to put that aside and make our communities safer for everybody.
I think I was just going to say, I mean, the question on one end is, do we need to take guns away from law-abiding people? Because it's not the law-abiding people who are really, and I think that's the fear. It's like, where are you going to go? You're going to start here, but where are you going to go next? And where are you going to go next? And again, it's not so much about those who are law-abiding that we need to deal with the guns. It's those who break the law.
So your fear is, or the fear of many people is, if the government is allowed to chip away at the rights to own guns here, then what's to stop them from chipping away further, right?
It would have to be considered. I mean, I think there's probably a history of that.
And a lot of people have that worry and that fear. But then again, the government takes away bazookas and Tommy guns, and there is regulations that nobody's trying to say, well, let us have back Tommy guns. We took them away in the 1930s or 40s.
The constitutional amendment, you all voted very differently on that constitutional amendment. Representative Pearson, you voted in favor of it, and Representative Badon, you voted against it. When we come back, because we have to take a break right now, but when we come back, we're going to talk to both of you about why you voted the way you voted and how you think the vote, well, it is the law of the land here now in Louisiana, but how it affects things going forward. And we are going to take your questions. We have lots of questions for our guests today, and we're going to get to those in just a few moments, so stay with us. We'll be right back.